Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another gripping episode of On Time. Today we have with us a surfer, a spearfisher, diver, amateur mechanic, and a woodworker.
And I think he's also a watchmaker, which is why we have him on.
Right.
Well, welcome, Cameron, of Weiss Watch Company.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
I would hope it's good to be here because we're in your office.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm here every Sunday, so this is perfect.
You work 24/7, don't you?
Pretty much.
I guess for somebody that's lucky enough to be doing what they love, it's, as they say, not really work.
We try and keep it pretty fun here.
It certainly looks like it with those other mechanical toys in the back, some wetsuits hanging over there, and lots of different machinery. So the question, I guess, not really surprising, I'm sure, but everyone wants to know, or that we want to know about everyone that we talk to, is what is your interest in watches? How did you get started?
It started pretty young. I was always fascinated with anything mechanical, not even mechanical stuff, just anything. I took apart electronics as well, but it really fascinated me to take things apart. I didn't really get them back together successfully, but I was always able to get them apart. As I got older and more experienced, I was able to fix some things, and that kind of led me down this path of, instead of buying something, I always tried to make it. Watches kind of became this item that I didn't know how to make. I didn't know they were made. I just knew that they existed, and I liked the way they made me feel when I looked at them on my wrist. So that kind of led me down the path of watches, and it wasn't until I found watchmaking that I realized I could put the two together and actually make these little mechanical machines that I could wear on my wrist, have that feeling, and to be able to look down at my wrist and see a watch that I made is the best feeling that I could have.
It's really an admirable answer. So what it sounds like you're saying, I don't mean to put words in your mouth, but just to do a quick summary. It's a mechanical interest that we all can relate to. But what you've done, which I find really interesting here, is that you were seeking to answer the question that was left. The thing you didn't understand is what drew you into this industry, or drew you into this interest, I should say, that eventually evolved into the industry.
Yeah, it was the one thing that I had no idea even existed when I was younger. I went through all kinds of different cars, boats, building decks and sheds and all kinds of things, but I never discovered watchmaking until I was a little bit older, and it blew my mind that there were people that actually put these things together, and they're these little mechanical marvels on your wrist. You can take them everywhere. You don't have to park them outside and leave them in the parking lot. You can bring them right into the room, into your house, and they're always with you. When I was in college, that was when I really learned about watchmaking. Prior to that, it was just, I like that watch. I like the way it makes me feel when I look at it. I like the way it feels in my hands, but I didn't understand the art behind it. And once I learned about watchmakers, that just set off this light bulb in my head, and I had to figure out how to become a watchmaker.
What did you go to school for?
So I went to school at USC for business administration, and I determined pretty early on that it wasn't for me.
That's a completely different thing from watchmaking, and I can tell you that I went to school for business too, and I'm not a watchmaker. It's one thing going from business into like a physical trade, but going into something as specific and as small of a world as watchmaking, that's like how did that happen?
It was really a long path to making that happen. It wasn't something that I could just decide I wanted to be a watchmaker. It came with that initial decision, and then I had to figure out where to go to school to become a watchmaker. I didn't want to just practice it on my own and try and learn it on my own. I felt it's important enough that I need to go learn from watchmakers who really know what they're doing and learn it the right way. Learn it from the best watchmakers. So I was lucky, and I found out that there was a Swiss watchmaking school here in the U.S. that I could go to. I did that for 2 years. It was full-time. We had 2 master watchmakers and 6 students. So it's very tiny, almost like an apprenticeship, except it's a school. But that was big for me, making sure I learned it the right way from the masters so that I really would understand all of the true artwork and the history that goes into it, rather than just opening up a watch, take it apart, put it back together. I wanted to do it right for the sake of the art behind watchmaking.
Obviously, business has a little bit of math, but when you're sitting and doing something as technical as watchmaking, all the calculations that I'm assuming you would need to do, were you ever at a point where you sat down at a watch table and you were like, I don't know about this. Like, this is maybe a little too technical?
I never had that experience. To me, watchmaking has always been more hands-on. There certainly are some calculations when you're dealing with, well, what's the power reserve going to be on this, or how many teeth go on the pinion to mesh up with this wheel. But other than that, really, for the most part, it's very hands-on. It's, how does this look? Am I pressing too hard with the sandpaper? Is this fixture perfectly square? Is the screwdriver blade perfect that I'm using on this screw? It's all very real. So when I do find myself working on a math equation, I get a little frustrated because I don't do it often and I forget. And it's frustrating to try and get back into that.
So after you finished watchmaking school, what was next?
Right after school, I went to Audemars Piguet. I was lucky I got a job with one of the best watchmakers in the world. And I immediately got flown over to Switzerland, did some training over there. And then I came back to the US and trained even more in their Clearwater facility, which has some unbelievable watchmakers, some of the best watchmakers in the US. So I was able to learn from Audemars Piguet how to be a watchmaker here in the US and really kind of uphold those Swiss standards that they are known for. After Audemars Piguet, I started working with a company called Vacheron Constantin, and they are another great company. That was very fortunate for me. I was able to go back to Switzerland, and I lived in Geneva for almost 2 months just working on complicated watches, training in things that I hadn't been exposed to with Audemars Piguet and also hadn't really been exposed to in school. School is kind of the prereq for getting a job with one of the great watch houses. And I was lucky. I worked for Audemars and then worked for Vacheron and was able to learn a great deal about more complex mechanisms than I would at some of the other companies that are making simpler watches.
Sounds like you had an amazing career, a career that I think most people who would want to practice watchmaking would hold what you've already done as one of their highest aspirations.
Yeah, I mean, Roger Smith went to work for TAG, which is kind of crazy how, you know, you're jumping to Audemars and then Vacheron right after. So the question, I guess, is did they see something in you, like your technical skill? How were you able to land those jobs? Because Clearwater, from what I understand, is not a big facility. So I'm assuming that there was a little bit of a competitive edge that you had to get over to Audemars, or was there not? Did you just get lucky?
I think there's always luck involved, but I think one of the most important things in watchmaking, or really not just watchmaking, any trade like watchmaking, if you are open and willing to learn and you go into a job open-minded, the people who really know what they're doing are very happy to teach you. Whereas if you go in there closed-minded and maybe you sit for a bench test at a place like Audemars Piguet or Vacheron, if you think that you already know how to do everything the right way, you know, I hold my tweezers this way, I do things that way, they're not going to teach you. They're just going to pass. If you go in there and you work properly with the people who have been doing it a long time, people who have 30, 40 years experience, and they see that you're eager to learn and that you can be taught, then they want to keep you around. They see you as somebody that could be very valuable in the future because the right people can be great watchmakers if they have the schooling and then they keep an open mind. But watchmakers tend to be closed-minded.
Why do you think that is? Why do you think most of these watchmakers are just kind of stuck in their own little tunnel and they don't like to go outside of that tunnel?
You know, that's a great question, and I don't really know. I have experienced that, though, with a lot of watchmakers, that they develop their own habits and their own way of doing things, and it's very hard to change that. For me, I was always open to learn things, especially when it's, you know, the guy who works at Vacheron in Geneva, and he is the one that troubleshoots, a grand complication if something's not working. You turn on the chronograph and the tourbillon cage stops turning. He's the guy that figures out where the interference is and what's going wrong. So when someone like that tells you, try oiling it in this order or try doing it this way, there's no reason to say, oh, I've always done it this way. That's how I'm going to do it. No, you should definitely listen to that guy. He knows what he's talking about. And even if it doesn't make sense right now, it eventually will as you progress.
I want to hear more about your experiences because obviously, you know, we do know the spoiler. You're no longer there. I'd love to know, I'm sure our listeners want to know, what was your experience there? Was there something that made you leave one or the other? Was it just not fulfilling?
I always wanted to start my own watchmaking company. That was the goal for going to school. That was the goal for working with other companies.
So this was already in your mind.
Yeah.
Okay, that's important to know. It wasn't like, oh, I just don't like this existence of working in the watch house. It was that working there was always going to be an intermediate step for you.
Yeah, my end goal, since I took my first job in really a mechanical field, my end goal was to just learn as much as I could, be it starting with CNC machining and working in a machine shop, going to school, working for the best watch companies that I could land jobs with. And really, the idea was to eventually get to a point where I amassed enough knowledge and skill that I felt like I could do a good job actually going off on my own and starting my own watch company.
Were there ever points, because of your incredibly accomplished career then with these companies, that you actually then reconsidered that? Did you ever think, I'm already with AP or I'm already with VC, maybe I should just stay here because this is a high position or high altitude from which to fall?
The one thing that I kept thinking back to was actually an executive over at Vacheron said to me, we take care of our watchmakers. You're now a Vacheron watchmaker. And at any time, if you want to do anything else, you can always call us up anytime. No questions asked. You're a Vacheron watchmaker. You can come back and you can work anywhere in the world for us.
Wow.
So that made a huge impact in my decision to go out on my own eventually after I amassed some knowledge and thought I could handle starting my own company. But the idea was if I fail, I'm still a very competent watchmaker that can go back and work for another watch company, any other company, or Vacheron, which I absolutely love. Both the companies that I worked for, they were the best places to work. I couldn't have asked anything more from them. I think in every watchmaker's mind, somewhere tucked away, is this idea that they want to make their own watch. Even if they're completely scared of the business side of it or don't want anything to do with the extra stress that comes along with the business, they still want to make their own watch. And they might make their own watch and just not sell it. It could just be something for themselves. For me, I always wanted to create something that would get more mechanical watches out to people, because watches are obsolete. It's something I always tell people, they're completely obsolete, but that doesn't take away from the fact that they bring me pleasure. They bring other people pleasure too. There's many people I talk to say, I love watches. The second I tell them I'm a watchmaker, they freak out and they tell me about all the watches they've had, the ones they wish they kept, the watch that they think is in some family lockbox somewhere. Everybody seems to love watches.
So now what I would like to know is, what were your dreams / what are your dreams? And then what has actually happened? How far are you from achieving the dream? Or is there a difference between the dream and the reality at this point?
That's a great question. The dream was to make my own watches. So I've met that goal, but of course, over time, the dreams have morphed. So initially it started out as simple as just making my own watches. That morphed into making as much as we could here in Los Angeles, and I think we're doing a great job with that. We have a pretty amazing machine shop and assembly facility right now that we can make almost all of a watch right here. So then the goal kind of morphed into, how can we make this watch here and actually get it onto more people's wrists? Get a mechanical watch out there that's reasonably priced and shows the real artwork behind watchmaking. So that's the current goal, is figuring out how to get these watches out there to more people, which means we have to work a lot more, train more people. I'm training a watchmaker here right now, and really just work towards teaching more people how to not only just machine the parts, but polish the parts, finish the parts, assemble the parts, quality control the parts, do all of these things that we have to do in watchmaking.
So about these parts, there is a big unknown and unspoken about issue, which is the quality of the steel and the quality of the alloys used for these parts that we're talking about. And having asked the question to all of the manufacturers at any price point, so what actual alloys, what steel are you using for the parts?
Yeah, it's something that we started off with a general idea of what we wanted to do and the alloys that we thought were used, but we really didn't know if they were even the best. Sometimes people continue to use something just because it's familiar. And we didn't want to just do that. What we realized was that 20 AP is a steel that's typically used in watchmaking, in modern watchmaking. Now, in school, anything that we made out of steel was carbon steel. And that material is a major headache, even to produce a couple of parts. It's a headache. Dimensionally, it's not stable. It warps with heat treating. It is just a tough material to use. It's easy to cut by hand, but tough to use. And when you're trying to actually build a business around it, you need something that's a little more reliable than that carbon steel. So we determined 20 AP was a good fit. It is a traditional material now, used with older CAM machines and also the more the computerized, the CNC powered lathes. But that material is what's chosen in the Swiss watchmaking houses, but it's not something that we can get here in the US. So because we couldn't get it here in the US, we wanted to figure out other alternatives as well. So it led us down this whole rabbit hole of testing different materials and seeing what would work, seeing what is dimensionally stable. And by that, I mean, when we cut it, if it needs to be 1/10 of a millimeter in diameter, that once we heat treat it, it's not going to change. So we can cut it exactly the way we want it, heat treat it, put it in a watch, and it works. So because of the larger production that we need, we want to find a really stable material and something we can get. And we found that the best material here is actually 17.4, which is not something that I've ever heard of being used in a watch, but it could be very similar to 20 AP. It's just one little percentage point of material could be slightly different. It might not actually have any difference, but it could be something that, well, Sandvik wanted to have a patent on that 20 AP. So they made it a little different than 17.4. They made it a little different than carbon steel. I don't know. I'm not a specialist in those materials, but I know that when we cut with the 17.4 or the 20 AP, it's completely stable.
What prompted you to push so hard to make something in Los Angeles as opposed to making something in Switzerland, which I'm assuming, based off of your history with Audemars and Vacheron, would have been slightly easier for you to do if you were to do Swiss made?
Oh yeah, it would have been quite a bit easier to go the Swiss made route. And that was always what I thought I was going to do, was go through school, work for some Swiss companies, really learn the industry and learn how things are made. I thought eventually I would move to Switzerland and set up a watchmaking company in Switzerland. It wasn't until much later on that I realized I don't have to move to Switzerland. And part of that was the amazing watches coming from Germany and seeing that they were able to develop this whole infrastructure that had disappeared in Germany and recreate something even better than it ever had been done in Germany with amazing results. And there was a long period of time, I think even still, where the guy who's in the know will say, oh, the best watches don't come from Switzerland anymore. They come from Germany. I heard that so many times that I realized it doesn't really matter where the watch comes from. It matters who's making them, who's paying attention to all the details and making sure that it's made right. It's not a geographic location.
It was a big portion of the marketing. It was a big portion of the prestige. Swiss made means that it's a high quality watch, and they dominated the market for so long that that's what you would associate them with, is just it's either Swiss cheese or Swiss watches.
Yeah.
Right.
Or what is it, Toblerone, right? The Toblerone candy. It's interesting to hear that you didn't really care for that, and it's refreshing, obviously. So let's talk about some of the challenges, because Made in USA is a pretty difficult distinction to have. And I think actually, to a certain extent, Made in USA has a lot stricter standards than Swiss made.
Definitely correct.
Yes, you are definitely correct, and which is why there was a company. We can just use the Shinola example, not to compare it to Weiss, but
what does shoe polish have to do with this?
Well, I'll tell you exactly what it has to do with it. If we would apply the Swiss standard for Swiss made to the debacle that Shinola faced over Made in USA.
Right. Was that the FTC that came after him?
Yes, it was.
Okay.
It would actually pass muster according to the Swiss standard, because 51% of the total overhead for producing the product, i.e. the marketing, was US-based.
So what you're saying is Tag Heuer needs to come to the US in order to make a quality product.
Something like that.
want to ask you some more questions about the whole USA made thing. What is the driving force in getting Los Angeles stamped on the dial, and what is the driving force of eventually, because your watches don't say made in USA yet, do they?
They do.
They do.
It depends on the watch. Some of them use Swiss movements, other ones use US movements. The goal is to produce as much as we can here. It's not necessarily a label that we're looking for. I don't think that that's necessarily as powerful as just making something that wows people. So having US made on there is not the first thing that we're interested in. The first thing is really being competent in all of the manufacturing processes behind making every component in the watch. That does come with being able to put US made on the dial, but we actually like LA a little more and choose to put Los Angeles on the dial because I personally believe that there's very few cities in the US that have enough infrastructure already existing to make a lot of the things that we've been making here. We're lucky. We're right down the street from SpaceX, and I talk to people over there and they help me out. They tell me different shops that they've worked with who have special machines that can cut certain parts or work with certain materials. So we do a lot of experimenting with other manufacturers who can help us out, people who are really knowledgeable in materials or machining, and that's a huge, huge benefit to being here in Los Angeles. Even though these people know nothing about watches or watchmaking, they're excited to help out on the project that we have, which is making American watches. So LA, to me, is more important to put on the dial because of that, but having a US-made product, I don't think hurts.
Sure.
We've covered your past and present. Forward-looking statements. What's the legacy that you want to leave for yourself and for the Weiss Watch Company, your namesake?
Well, having come from companies like Audemars Piguet and Vacheron Constantin, a big deal for me is to see the company exist for a long period of time, hundreds of years, ideally, without my involvement. I hope there's enough traction, really, with American watches and enough people around that are able to get into this trade that can support this industry into the future. I really think it's something that will last for many generations. And I'm not talking about just the watch. I'm talking about an industry here that could come back and be something really unique.
Once you've been able to accomplish increasing your independence, if there are plans to do so, what's the plan to evolve or improve upon the movements that you have?
So when I first decided the 6497 was what I wanted to work with, I ran it by some people at another company, and I really trust what they said to me, which was, that is a great movement. We worked with it for Panerai, and it is just a workhorse, exactly what everyone says. It always works. If it doesn't, it's very easy to fix, super reliable, and just a great movement to look at as well. It looks like a pocket watch. It fills the back of the case. It's beautiful, and you can actually see what's going on. So I stuck with it, and I still, to this day, think that it's a great movement. There's absolutely nothing wrong with it. It is a little big, but I look at that as a good thing. Being a watchmaker, it means the parts are more robust, the bridges are more stable, and then you also have the visual appeal of it being that size. Like I said, it fills the case, and you can really understand this wheel is turning that wheel. The click is moving this way because of you interacting with the crown. It feels like you're actually interacting with the watch rather than some of the smaller watches that feel almost like you still can't understand how they were put together or how that wheel is moving so fast. It's just so tiny. I like the size of it.
Short term, even if it's not short term, let's say 10 years, 15 years down the line, is there going to be an actual Weiss caliber that is not based on something that you already use?
As a watchmaker, not basing something on a previous movement or previous knowledge would be unwise. Just
Good
because
answer. Good, very good and honest answer. I was thinking that as you were saying, and I'm so glad you said it because I didn't want to have to say it myself.
Yeah, I mean, there's only so much new you can do when we're working with a product that, the Swiss lever is very old. And if we were to change that, what does that leave us with? Is that a traditional mechanical watch? I don't know. And how well would it work? Would it stand up for 100 years like the ones that we see now that someone pulls out of their safe when a family member passes away and they wind it up just like their great-grandfather wound it up and it ticks? And that says a lot about that design and that maybe we should keep it around. So we have gear trains that the ratios have already been engineered. We know exactly what a good ratio is for the gear train. We know what good beat rates are. If you start to get too high with the beat rate, you end up with issues with wear. You have problems with lubrication, which is why watches typically are 28.8 right now. It's a good stable rate. Why deviate from that unless you want to do something really different and not necessarily think about what's going to happen to that watch in 30 years or what's going to happen to that watch in 100 years. So to me, I don't think there's really a way to develop a new watch, or at least a mechanical watch, that is that different from what has always existed in the realm of mechanical watches. And that's probably a good thing, I think. I like the tradition of it and knowing that the reason we're doing it is because it works and it's simple in a way that a watchmaker who looks at it in 50 years will say, they made a good choice going with this beat rate because the wear on the pallet fork, there's barely any wear. This is great. I can reuse the escape wheel, a little polish here maybe, fix up the pinions a little, and we're good to go. Changing that, I don't see a reason to change that.
Unfortunately, Chase, we're running out of time at On Time.
I do believe we are, and so I think that means we should say thank you and say our goodbyes to our guest and our host here, actually, since we are using his office to record.
And drinking his coffee.
And water.
It was a pleasure having you.
Sparkling water, by the way. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Hold on,
anytime. Come back anytime.
Team OTP is Chase Kaufman, Ken Shu, Mike Senderovich, Sivad Andun, and Tim Hatayama. Make sure to follow us on Instagram and Facebook at On Time Podcast. And on behalf of the entire OTP team, thanks so much for listening.